Elite Wrestle Talk, 99.9 Punk World Radio FM. This is episode 28. We got a really amazing guest. We got ESPN journalist. This guy has worked with Fox Sports, New York Post. The list goes on, but he actually added another jack to his trades. He is now an author and set to release the book coming up later this month. The author of nWo, Say Hello to the Bad Guys. We got Raimondi right here. Marc Raimondi, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. I gotta say, first and foremost, thank you so much for a bit of your time. I love the promotion that I've been seeing for this book. I'm seeing people like Eric Bishop, which we're gonna get into here later on, give his quote and whatnot. I'm just seeing all these people, giving this book so much praise, and I really, really, really hope that it lands on the New York Times bestseller list because it definitely deserves it.
I appreciate that a lot, man, and I hope so too. Just for the fact of validation for wrestling fans, I think that's kind of like where I'm coming from with that, because I feel like for too long wrestling has been stigmatized, and I think that a book, like a journalistic book about wrestling that explores wrestling and culture and American society together, I think that would be to get on the Times list would be so huge just for the art of wrestling.
And before we dive into this book, I like doing a little bit of background on an individual. That way, people can get to know a little bit more about your career before we talk about the stuff that you actually are here to promote. But I want to take you back to the very beginning. Obviously, you have such a huge passion for journalism. I was wondering what actually inspired you to actually get into journalism and, of course, venture off to St. John's University out there in Queens, New York.
Yeah, so as a kid, I always had a notebook, and I was always like writing things down in a notebook, watching like sports or watching like MTV and like chronicling what was on and what was going and what was happening, keeping scores of baseball games and just keeping track of everything. I was like a junkie when it came to like reading the box scores in the daily newspaper, in New York, and reading all that stuff, reading the writers and the New York Post, the New York Daily News, and Newsday every day. I was a Sports Illustrated subscriber since I was a kid. I don't even remember. I think I was like 8 or 9 years old, when I started subscribing to Sports Illustrated. And I was just reading all of these writers, and I love sports so much, and I was never going to be a professional athlete. I'm 5'6", and not really all that athletic. Play a little bit of basketball in my day, but just really love sports and wanted to do something involving sports, and was just interested in chronicling sports. And then when I got to high school, I started to take English classes, and I guess I found out that I was a pretty decent writer. And then it all kind of just connected then. It was like, okay, well, I'm not going to play in the NBA, and I love wrestling, obviously, too, but I was never really, like, that was never going to be in the cards for me to be a wrestler. But I loved, watching it and writing about it. And I ended up loving writing and being pretty good at it. And that's kind of where it all started in high school, where I was like, all right, well, I'm never going to be a pro athlete. I'm a pretty good writer. Well, I love sports. So what do? We become a sports writer.
And also, being a sports writer as well has landed you many, many amazing opportunities throughout your career, especially after venturing off to university and completing that. But way before ESPN, you actually worked for Vox Media's website, MMAfighting.com. I was wondering if you can tell us a bit more about your time with working with Vox, and of course, how it ultimately led to you getting hired by Fox Sports in 2013.
It's actually the opposite. I was with Fox Sports, then I went to Vox. So I was actually with MMA Fighting after Fox Sports. Fox Sports was my first full-time job covering MMA, and then I was able to latch on with MMA Fighting in 2014. And I mean, I'm not sure if you're a big MMA fan. I think that you are, right?
I would say a little bit. I'm more of wrestling, but I have watched some MMA. Yeah.
Got it. So the team that we had at MMAfighting.com was so good. I mean, Ariel Helwani was our leader, right? And everyone knows Ariel, your fellow Canadian, right?
Yeah.
And it was such a great team. And for me, for my money, at the time period that we were there was such an important time period in MMA history because it was the rise of Ronda Rousey, the rise of Conor McGregor, really the big boom period that made MMA mainstream, the sale to Endeavor, UFC 200. I mean, all of these milestone moments, McGregor versus Mayweather, and I was able to cover all those things with Ariel Helwani and with my coworkers at the time there at MMA Fighting, and really grateful to be to really have been at that place at the right time to cover a sport that I grew up watching because I was a wrestling fan, and then I saw this at Blockbuster Video, UFC tape, one day, and I took that home, and I became a huge MMA fan as well. So yeah, I really that was really some of my most fun years of my career working for those guys at MMA Fighting and Fox, and still call every single one of those writers, reporters, videographers, photographers, hosts. All of them are dear friends to me even now. It was a very tight knit group, and I'll be going on Ariel Helwani's show next week. Actually, I'll be in New York, and I'll be in studio.
And I will admit, I haven't watched a lot of MMA, but the one time I did order a pay-per-view is when GSP lathered himself up with that Vaseline.
Against BJ Penn.
That's a one fight I remembered. And I was telling my friends, I don't understand. How is that illegal? And he goes, they're like, dude, you just can't do that. I'm like, but it's fighting.
Well, we don't actually know if he did that. That might have just been sour grapes by BJ Penn. I would err on the side of George St. Pierre on that one, personally.
And I will say he's in Canada as well, so he can definitely come at me a lot easier than if I was overseas. So I definitely agree. It was not GSP's fault.
Canadian national hero, George St. Pierre.
I actually met him at a Comic-Con, and he actually is really, really nice. I mean, I wouldn't want to get on his bad side, of course, but I mean, he's a very nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
And also, obviously, you went back in the day, you worked for the New York Post and you worked for Fox. It must have been such a surreal moment in your career just to land all these amazing opportunities. Because obviously, the New York Post is a really big newspaper out there in New York. But just going from the New York Post to Fox and then to ESPN, it must have been a surreal moment for any big journalist like yourself to actually get that North American status.
Yeah, and it was the way that happened was kind of crazy because I had to kind of reinvent myself several times. So I got the job at the New York Post because a few guys, friends of mine who were also local writers, local reporters in New York, we were all covering high school sports for smaller outlets weekly newspapers. And I was a kid. I was 22 years old. And then we all decided to leave where we were working and start our own website covering high school sports all over New York City. And that site did so well that the New York Post actually absorbed it and hired all four of us, to be their high school sports staff. That's how I got my start at the New York Post, covering high school sports and some local colleges, of course. And then, I was able to work myself up into a role in the office as a web editor, an assistant online sports editor. And then that's when I started writing about MMA, because I got the job writing for and being an editor for the New York Post website. And I convinced my bosses at the time to let me just write some MMA blogs, here and there, a little bit of wrestling too. And they did. They allowed me to do it. And that's how I was able to get to Fox Sports, through that work, through that writing about the UFC and MMA. And so I went from high schools to being an online sports editor to being a full-time MMA writer in just 3 or 4 years. And now I cover the NFL, so I'm all over the place.
And obviously you mentioned back in the day you covered a little bit of wrestling news alongside the MMA. Mm-hmm. I know you've written thousands upon thousands of stories, but do you actually remember the first wrestling story that you actually covered?
Gosh. I don't honestly. I don't remember the first one. I mean, I wrote a few blogs for the New York Post, but nothing all too memorable, I would say, right? But at MMA Fighting, I was able to, because MMA Fighting is owned by Vox Media, which also owns SB Nation. So I was able to write some wrestling stuff for SB Nation, and also SB Nation has a wrestling site called Cage Side Seats. So when I was there, I did a little bit of stuff there. So I covered WrestleMania in 2018 for SB Nation, and I covered when New Japan would come to LA, I would cover that type of stuff locally. Even was doing some writing from Tokyo when I was in Japan, just on vacation. I was doing some stuff for Cage Side Seats, but really it was ESPN when I was kind of given the ability to do more like features and like bigger wrestling articles, and that's I really enjoyed doing that. You know, it's so hard. Like covering MMA full time is hard. There's not too many jobs out there covering MMA, covering the UFC. There's very few, and there's even fewer full-time jobs covering wrestling as a professional journalist. So the times that I got to write about wrestling for ESPN were I definitely hold dear to me.
And one of the last questions I have about your journalism career before we actually get into the wrestling side of things, I know you briefly mentioned it, that you actually are currently a part of the Atlanta Hawks ESPN NFL Nation journalism team. I was wondering, how did you actually land the opportunity to cover the Atlanta Hawks? And of course, just what is it like working alongside ESPN? Because when you think sports, even here in Canada, when you think sports, you think ESPN.
Yeah, it's actually the Atlanta Falcons. It's the NFL team. The Hawks is the NBA. I cover the NFL. Yeah. uh, yeah. Look,
You can tell I don't watch a lot of sports. That's embarrassing.
that's completely fine. So it was you know, I covered MMA and the UFC for 11 years and about 5 years with ESPN, and it was obviously an incredible time. I traveled a lot. I covered all the biggest fights. Really, I mean, I was nominated for MMA Journalist of the Year. Like I feel like I did a lot in that space, and it was something that I wanted to do. It was a dream of mine to do that, and I did it. And I felt like after 11 years, it was kind of time to try something new. Like I mean, we only get one life, right? You know, and you do something for 11 years. It's like, what else can what else can I go do? What else can I, you know, uh, excel at? Like, can I challenge myself to do something else, right? Because you do something for long enough, you get burnt out. You're like, what else is out there? I like challenges. That's why I wrote a damn book. I like challenges, and the NFL, job became available to me last year, and I felt like it was my time. My time to leave MMA. I stayed on the UFC beat up until UFC 300. I felt like that was a perfect jumping off point, right? A nice even round number, UFC 300, and then I moved on and I moved to Atlanta to cover the Falcons, and it's really been great, and it's been a little scary. I won't even lie, because you do one thing for 11 years, and I was very set in my routine, and everyone knew me. I knew everyone in that world, and then I moved across the country from LA to Atlanta. I got a new job, with new people that I don't know, covering a team with people that I don't know, in a sport that I don't, that I'm not as expert in as I was MMA. So it was the first season was definitely a challenge. I had a lot of personal challenges along the way, moving to a new place, but I feel definitely a lot more settled now, and I'm really looking forward to this next season for the Falcons, because I think they could actually be pretty good this year, and just having one season under your belt is a game changer, and I feel like I'm ready to kind of hit the ground running into year two.
And of course, obviously, from football to MMA to college basketball, the list goes on and on of everything you covered. But how does professional wrestling really come
I've
into play?
covered everything. Everything. I
What
mean,
sparked your passion for professional wrestling? Like from the very beginning, like that was it like a wrestler that got you into professional wrestling, or
mhm.
was it just you flicking through the TV one night and on comes Monday Night Raw or Friday Night SmackDown?
I was actually talking to my mom last night on the phone, and I was asking her if she remembered like what like spurred me to become a wrestling fan when I was a kid, because it all started when I was a kid. And I don't really remember how I ended up starting to watch it. I know that my grandfather was a fan of wrestling. He was not a huge fan, but I think he had it on a little bit. Um, but my first memory was 1990 of Hogan versus Warrior. As being a kid, I was born in '84, so I was like, I guess I turned 6 that year. I wasn't even 6 yet, but I was 5, and I remember having the magazines, but I don't remember the exact moment where it all like came together for me, and I said, okay, I love this stuff. But it was early. It was definitely early, when I was about 5 years old, and I'm 40 now, so it's been a minute. Um, But the one thing that I do remember, like my first memory of like an event or a match was Hogan versus Warrior at WrestleMania in Canada, right? In Toronto.
I believe it was Toronto, Ontario at the Sky Dome. I think it was WrestleMania 6, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that was that was like my first memory, because I honestly, of course gone back and I've looked at the matches before that and the characters before that, and I don't remember watching it, but I do remember Hogan versus Warrior. I remember being an Ultimate Warrior fan, unfortunately, and I remember wanting him to beat Hulk Hogan. You know, that was I remember that vividly, and then really I've been a fan ever since. I mean, I've had kind of ups and downs where I kind of step away from it a little bit when, the whole Chris Benoit thing happened. I had to kind of get away from wrestling for a few years, and I came back to it, and now I watch, I'm fully, I'm watching everything. I'm just a junkie. My wife hates it, but she actually doesn't hate it. She's completely fine with it. But yeah, that was really where it started back in like the very, very early '90s when I was 5 years old. Hogan versus Warrior.
The first memory I have of watching wrestling is I think it was Monday Night Raw 1998, where the Stone Cold Steve Austin gives a corporation a beer bath. After that, I'm like,
Well,
this is absolute bananas. I love it. I couldn't stop watching it after that.
yeah, I mean, wrestling is so it's so fascinating to me because it's almost like just one long running like story that everything is kind of connected to everything else. Like the lore runs so deep in wrestling, and you picked it up in '98, right, with Stone Cold, and I picked it up, 8 years earlier than that with Hulk Hogan and Warrior, and I kept watching. And I remember Stone Cold with the beer bath and all that, and it's really like it's an incredible art. It really is. It's really an incredible one of a kind entertainment medium.
And June 24th, 2025, your book, nWo, Say Hello to the Bad Guys, will be released worldwide. Can you tell us the story behind this book? And of course, what ultimately led to you creating a book based upon the iconic World Championship Wrestling faction, the New World Order, nWo?
That is terrifying, actually. The way you said that is the whole world is going to see the book on June 24th. That makes me a little bit nervous. So
There's no
this
turning back now, Mark.
the story is actually kind of crazy because it was not initially my idea, and that's rare when it comes to writing books, right? But what happened was for ESPN, right? I was doing some wrestling, and in 2019, it was announced that the nWo was going to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. And I was assigned that story for ESPN, for ESPN.com. So WWE hooked me up with interviews with Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan for that story. And I wrote it, and I wrote it like with some passion, because I'm a wrestling fan, and that's the '90s was my era, when I was in my formative years, and it was, it's deeply ingrained in me, the 1990s wrestling. So I wrote that story with a lot of heart and soul. And then it was over, and I didn't think about it again, until May 2021. I got an email. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Houston, Texas, and I'm there for a UFC fight, and it's fight week, and the press conference is coming up in a few hours, and I'm just sitting in the hotel room working, and I get an email, and the email is from someone who says they are an editor at Simon and Schuster, which is one of the biggest, book publishers in the world. And this alleged editor is asking me if I want to write a book about the nWo. And the first thing that I thought, quite frankly, was this is BS. This is not real. This is probably a scam. I might get my social security number taken by someone if I reply to this email. So I googled the name of this person, and to see if this is legit. Turns out it was legit. This person was a real editor at Simon and Schuster. We spoke later that day, and we hit it off immediately. And basically, what happened was he got the job at Simon and Schuster. He was a wrestling fan growing up, and he wanted someone to write a book about the nWo that he would work on as the editor. He wanted that, and he was in search of an author. And on my story from ESPN.com about the nWo going to the Hall of Fame. and he noticed that I didn't just write a quick short story about this. I wrote a long 2,000 plus word story that, I kind of like went off for no reason. Like I didn't have to do that, but I did because it meant something to me. He saw that and he felt like, okay, well, I think this is my guy to write the book. And that's how it happened. And then, it all kind of, snowballed from there. We spoke, we had very similar ideas and a vision for what the book could be and what the nWo and wrestling has been to culture and American society. And that was it. It was kind of like off to the races. And that was 4 years ago. So this has been a long time coming, this book coming out.
And also, speaking of a long time coming, as we mentioned, a lot of individuals have been giving this book phenomenal reviews. And one of them is from a former executive producer and senior vice president of World Championship Wrestling. His name is Eric Bischoff.
Yeah.
He gave your book an amazing review where he actually wrote, in his words, "Say Hello to the Bad Guys is looking at the nWo from purely a pop culture perspective in a way that has not been covered before. Not been done before. This one is an entirely different perspective, and it's fascinating so far." I have to ask you, Mark, how does it feel to have your work co-signed by someone that it was wholeheartedly responsible for the formation and the creation of the New World Order?
Yeah, I mean, it was that was very nice of him, I'm very grateful, not just for that, but also the time that he gave me in writing this book. I traveled up to Cody, Wyoming, where he lives, and we had breakfast together. I went over his home. I met his wife. We sat down for hours and hours and hours, and I asked every possible question you could possibly ask one about the nWo. And I really couldn't be more grateful for Eric Bischoff. Really, really nice guy. Really good guy. So accommodating, and it was really important, man, for me to interview Eric Bischoff for this book. So much so that when I told you story about the email and how they found me to write this book, I really did not want to write the book until I spoke with Eric Bischoff and he agreed to talk to me for the book. And I did that. I did that in 2021. It was a few weeks later, actually. It was Double or Nothing weekend in Jacksonville, Florida. I flew down to Jacksonville and I contacted Eric and we met at a Dave & Buster's. And it was a very brief, like maybe 10, 15-minute meeting. I told him who I was. And he was a little bit familiar with me already from ESPN. I think I had interviewed him before. So I wasn't a completely foreign person to him. So we spoke for just a few minutes, and I told him what I wanted to do, and that I needed his help. And he said, "Yeah, no problem. I'll give you whatever. I'll help you however you need." And that was it. That was really what kind of cemented the fact that I was going to do this book because I mean, listen, how can you write a book about the nWo without interviewing the person who created the nWo? And that's Eric Bischoff, and that's why he was so important to this whole thing.
And obviously you asked him, like, as you said, you asked him almost every question you possibly could. With that being said, what was that one question that you asked Eric Bischoff that you were actually surprised with the answer? I'm sure there was quite a bit of them, but what is one that comes to your mind where you're like, whoa, like I don't really believe that?
Man, you know what? It was like, it's hard to say there was one question, but he really did open up a lot, even about things he doesn't discuss on the podcast. Like he really opened up a lot about, how much drugs and alcohol played a part in everything that was going on in the 90s, like the backstage drama and all that stuff. And that's not stuff that he talks a lot about. And just kind of like keeping everything together, because there were points in time in 98 where Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan were at each other's throats. Like they wanted to freaking kill each other. And Eric Bischoff, say what you will about Eric Bischoff. I know that some people don't have very fond things to say about Bischoff, but keeping that whole thing together for as long as he did was almost like half the battle, because there was a lot of egos and a lot of drama involved backstage. Scott Hall is at rehab, Kevin Nash and Hogan, want to strangle each other. So stuff like that really stood out to me. But there really wasn't one particular thing other than that. Everything stood out. I mean, quite frankly, like he really. I mean, I'm talking about like I talked about like 7 hours. So it's like it's a lot of interview tape. So it's a lot. But yeah, just really went deeper than I think he normally does in the podcast about a lot of stuff.
And I do know when it comes to World Championship Wrestling, a lot of people are either a Bischoff fan or they're a Vince Russo fan. I'm not just saying this for the sake of the interview. I personally have always been an Eric Bischoff fan. I really loved what he did with WCW. Vince Russo, he gets an A for effort in my opinion, but I will say I'm definitely a Bischoff guy.
Yeah, I mean, look, he was the only person to ever have defeated Vince McMahon for any period of time. So he has to get a world of credit for that. The way that he was able to take WCW, which when he took over as the executive vice president, or even before that, when he took over as the producer, uh, WCW was not making any money. It was absolutely a second rate promotion. If you change the channel to WCW and then put on WWF, there was a stark difference, right? In
Yeah.
what you were seeing, production value wise, quality wise, everything was different. And the way that he was able to to build that up, and yes, certainly, he needed Ted Turner's money to do that, but that's just how these things. I mean, that's not you can't fault him for that. I mean, he had to convince Ted Turner to allow him to do that. He had to give Ted Turner enough trust, to show him that he could trust him to open up the checkbook to get Hulk Hogan and Macho Man and Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and so on and so forth. And the NWO is like we're talking about it today. I mean, we're literally talking. It's 2025, and this was his idea. So he deserves a world of credit because we're still talking about this thing 30 years later. I mean, that is incredible.
And even the fans as well, you still see a lot of NWO t-shirts. I know I'm wearing the ECW variation of it, but I couldn't find my NWO shirt, so I had to settle for the BWO. So I mean, it is what it is. But people are still wearing the shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Still see people going like this all the time. I mean, it's definitely a phenomenon, man, and he definitely created something great that's going to resonate. I think with all us wrestling fans, probably till the end of time.
100%. I mean, I was just at WrestleMania in Las Vegas, and I was there all week, and I mean, you saw thousands of people with NWO shirts, and it's 2025, and it's like, man, how many things from 30 years ago are still remembered with that kind of like love and affection and gravity? There's not many. There's really not many. And I actually one of the things that Eric told me when I talked to him was that when he was back in WWE in around like 2019 as an executive, he said that the NWO merchandise was still in the top 10. 20 something years later, still in the top 10 of merchandise for WWE. And that is really just like uncanny. Stone Cold and NWO have really transcended wrestling. They're much bigger than just wrestling. They are recognizable brands, in pop culture in America and beyond. I mean, so when I first started writing the book, I went down to Florida to Hulk Hogan's beach shop down in Clearwater, and I picked up an NWO hoodie. And since then, I have been wearing it on like every trip that I take. Every time I go to the airport, that's like my airport outfit. I throw on the NWO hoodie, and you will not believe the amount of times that someone recognizes the logo, who flashes the Turkish wolf, who says "too sweet," who says "for life," who sings the freaking entrance music. I mean, I'm telling you, like 90% of the time on these trips, someone recognized the hoodie, the logo. That is unbelievable, including in Tokyo, Japan, when I was there a few years ago. I mean, just you don't think that someone is gonna recognize the NWO shirt, but a Japanese man who was probably like in his 50s recognized it. I mean, again, it has transcended so many. It's transcended wrestling, and it has become, a staple of '90s culture and a staple of American pop culture, and that's why, the subtitle of the book is "How It Changed America," because that's how big and how important it has been.
And just to summarize everything you said with the airport, people in Tokyo, I just got to throw one of Hulk Hogan's famous quotes out there. This is a new world order of wrestling, brother. That summarizes all that right there. Because they even saw that back then. I don't think they understood really the magnitude of what they were really doing in that moment. But I definitely can tell you that they probably had a feeling that all this would come to fruition.
They had no idea. They had no clue that it was going to be as big as it was. It was like it was a wrestling angle and it was a wrestling storyline, and they did not know that it was going to explode to be much bigger than that. They really did not know. And who could tell? You never know what's going to really hit. But it captured the zeitgeist like really nothing else in wrestling had up until that point on a national level. where, you know, you just saw NWO shirts everywhere. You know, being a kid in the 90s and going out to the mall, you know, with your parents or with your friends on the weekends, you saw NWO shirts everywhere. I mean, or Austin 316 shirts. It was truly, truly a big part of pop culture that I think that people who are, you know, current fans who are younger probably don't understand, because yeah, you might see like a Roman Reigns shirt somewhere or a Cena shirt somewhere now, but I'm telling you, if you went outside in 1998 or 99, you were seeing an Austin 316, you were seeing an NWO, and you might have even been seeing like a DX or even, you know, other stuff, because it truly was one of the biggest things in pop culture, and the NWO started it all. That was the catalyst that kicked off that 90s wrestling boom.
And I think any kid that was born in the 80s or 90s definitely got suspended from school by doing the DX suck it chop. 100. I will admit I got
100%.
suspended a couple times, but it was a revolution. You can't stop it.
And Sean Waltman and Scott Hall were doing that even before DX. You know, like Sean Waltman, when he was in the NWO as Six, he was doing it in WCW. Scott Hall was doing it. Like, they were doing the cross chop even before. DX is where it became like a staple. You know, where it became like one of the you know, the most popular gestures in the history of American culture. It's like it's everywhere. Like, you know, Joel Embiid. I know you're not a big sports fan, but you know, Joel Embiid is one of the best players in the NBA, and he's done it twice, and he's gotten fined for it. You know, and he probably wasn't even alive when DX was at their height, but it's just become a staple of American culture. You know, for better or worse, I guess.
And with this book as well, I've been seeing a lot of contests going on actually on your social media handles. Can you tell us a bit more about these contest giveaways? And of course, how can the listeners of the radio station tonight enter for their chance to win a potential copy of this book? Because I have to say, this book is definitely going to be one of the hottest wrestling books of the year 2025. People think the summer is going to be a scorcher. Wait till they touch this book.
Well, thank you for that. So yeah, I mean, right now on my Twitter, which is at Marc Raimondi, which is right on the screen there, right? And my Instagram is at Marc Raimondi Sports. Right now, I started a sweepstakes for 3 signed figures: one of Hulk Hogan, 2 of Eric Bischoff. I'm collaborating with Eric Bischoff in a show 83 Weeks for this particular giveaway, and yeah, so you can go on there and it'll explain everything about how you can enter to win. It runs only until the end of the week, but basically, you know, you like, you follow, you share or you comment, and then you buy the book and you show me in DMs that you bought the book this week, and you're entered to win, and that's it. And this is like, those figures are signed. Like a Hulk Hogan signed figure is like $300+. Like, this is like a pretty big giveaway, you know, for people. And the Eric Bischoff ones are probably over $100 too. So it's a pretty sizable, like, you know, prize if you win. So just putting that out there if you guys want to go on, you know, on social media and check that out.
And also, with this book already being a great success before the official release, would you ever consider doing another wrestling book in the future? And if so, what topic and/or wrestler would you be interested in covering next?
That's a really good question. All I'll say is stay tuned.
I got to
Stay
say,
tuned.
I will admit, I would love to see someone actually do an Eddie Guerrero book, man. I mean, just from like a journalist and a fan's point of view. I mean, we saw so many autobiographies from his family and friends, but I'd love to see someone kind of looking in to the rear view, kind of touching base on that. I think that'd be just a phenomenal story.
I love that idea. I had not actually thought of that, but I do love that idea. I do. I will definitely write that down. But I will say that there is definitely a possibility that there could be more books coming.
And before we move off the topic of the book and start to wrap things up, what is one thing that you would want the fans of this book to actually take from it? Because obviously no one other than yourself and Eric Bischoff and all the people involved, they obviously had the opportunity to read it. But for the fans, we're kind of in the dark until the end of the month when we can get our hands on the book, or to whenever it actually lands on our doorstep. So with that being said, where
Yep.
can we snag ourselves a copy, and what do you want the fans of your work to actually take from this book after they open the page and close the last page?
That's a great question, man. And thank you for asking that question, because you know, as a journalist, I'm constantly thinking of what my audience is and who my audience is, and that's one of the most important things as a writer, as a journalist, is to kind of know who you're catering to, because that's the consumer is the most important person when you're when you're doing these projects. Because if you're doing them for, if you don't know who your audience is, then you don't really have a project. You have a, it's for you, it's like a vanity type of deal, and that's not what this is. So when I was writing this book, I there were three different kind of demographics that I was trying to hit as I was doing it. And one of them is the current fan. And that's a very hard demographic because they know everything. They know a lot of stuff about the NWO already. They know the history. They listen to the podcast potentially, and they know the lore. And that is a very hard group to really service. But I tried my damnedest, and there are things in this book that people don't know that they will find out. I was the first person to find the woman who designed the nWo logo. She had never been found before. She was a complete unknown until I found her a couple of years ago, and that's all in the book, all that stuff. And then there were two other groups too, one being non-fans and one being lapsed fans. And the lapsed fans are very important to me because there's so many people, and I mentioned that story about the nWo hoodie, right? There are so many people that remember so fondly 1990s wrestling, the nWo, but they haven't watched since then, right? That they dropped off at some point. They grew up, they had kids. Maybe they're watching now, maybe they're not, but they still remember the nWo so fondly. And that was a lot of those people that I met at airports and on the road. And I really wanted to write this book for them too, because they aren't listening to the podcast and they aren't, following today's, stuff. And this is going to be a great blast of nostalgia and kind of blast from the past, for them to kind of take them back into the 90s and also contextualize what was happening in the 90s around the nWo as well, because it is also a book, about culture and about society. And then the third group is the non-fans. And, those are very tough because they may not pick up the book, right? Because they're not fans of wrestling. But I think this would be a great learning experience for people who are not fans of wrestling, who maybe are curious about, why some things are happening in today's society. Why is the president of the United States in the WWE Hall of Fame? How did that happen? We go into a lot of that in the book, and just stuff that kind of touches all of us that we don't realize. And I think it's just a good book in general from like a nonfiction standpoint. It's a great story that I think anyone, even non-fans, can read and enjoy, because these are very interesting, compelling individuals. Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, very interesting people in general, Eric Bischoff. And I think it's just a really super interesting story for even non-wrestling fans. And those are the three groups. And I gotta tell you, man, it's hard to service all three because they're three very distinct groups. And I tried to write a little bit for all of them. So hopefully I succeeded. The second part of your question was, how do you find the book? Well, it's everywhere you can find books, basically. It's on Amazon right now. It's on Barnes and Noble's website. Really anywhere you buy books, you can pre-order it right now if you're in the US and Canada. And June 24th is the release date, but you can pre-order it today. You can pre-order it right now if you log on to Amazon or wherever you buy your books.
And I got to say, first and foremost, Mark, before we part ways, thank you for putting all these past 4 years into this project, into this book. From an nWo fan myself, obviously I've seen all the documentaries. I have all the DVDs and the VHSs, and I've read a lot of autobiographies, but they're always written by either like Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff, people that were involved. So it's really cool and exciting to hear that someone else from that wasn't involved back then, that was just a fan, giving their point of view. So thank you for this amazing body of work. And I'm super excited just to read your thoughts on the nWo and everything involved with it back in the 90s, man. I'm looking forward to reading the journalistic point of view.
Thank you so much. And I interviewed almost 100 people for this book, and I kind of left like no stone unturned in terms of like, I interviewed like associate producers and camera people and like the engineer in the production truck. And, it was a labor of love, trying to track down all these people, including the woman who made the logo that no one knew, and it was fun to do. It was definitely a lot of work, but it was work. What's the word I'm looking for? It was definitely something that was worth it. It was very rewarding. And I hope everyone enjoys it. And that's one of the hardest things about being and the same for you, because you're in the media industry, right? One of the hardest things is kind of like being vulnerable and exposing yourself to criticism and being just putting yourself out there, and you have a show, and I'm a writer and I do podcasts, stuff like that, and that's one of the hardest things. And in 2 weeks people are going to be reading this thing, and that's a little scary. I'm not gonna lie to you, man. But I'm excited, and I hope everyone enjoys it. I'm definitely open to feedback, and yeah, man. Like you said before, I'm a fan. I'm a fan like everybody else. I happen to have a degree in journalism and 20 years of journalism experience. So, I could use those tools also. But end of the day, I'm a giant pro wrestling fan like y'all. And it was a hell of a lot of fun to do all this.
And I got to say, I definitely agree with you when it comes to putting yourself out there. I will admit, I personally have social anxiety, so I kind of use this platform and my radio station to kind of get myself out there and kind of make myself a little bit more. See, like DJ Immortal's a cool person that can talk to you about wrestling. Brandon's the one being like, oh man, I don't want to go in front of the camera tonight. Like, what are you doing? So I got to flick that switch a little bit to kind of get that to get the ball rolling on this. But
I'm with you, man. And some would say that you have to put on a pro wrestling character to do it, because I feel like that's the way it goes sometimes, where when you're in front of the camera, which I am sometimes for my regular job at ESPN, you kind of have to change. You can't be you have to kind of turn it up a little bit, and be somebody else, or at least a version of yourself that isn't there every day. And actually, I'll leave you with one last thing, 'cause I know we're winding down, but I interviewed and you're in Canada, so you probably don't know this name, but I interviewed Andrew Yang, who was a presidential candidate in 2020, that went up against Donald Trump and was in the Democratic primary. And he was an important guy for me to interview, because I knew he was a wrestling fan growing up, and now he's in politics, and he's in a very important position, and I wanted to kind of get his gauge of where things are. And he told me, like, when he did his speeches in front of a crowd, he had to put on his best pro wrestling persona, and give his best pro wrestling promo to these people. And he was actively thinking of that, like, who am I gonna how am I gonna address this crowd? And there's so much of that in the world that we don't even realize. Social media, like, all these people are playing personas. Like, they're playing a character. Like, they're not actually like that in real life. They're not like that. Their TikTok is not their real life. Their TikTok is some kind of persona or a character, the way that pro wrestlers play a character on television. And I think again, I spoke about non-fans. Like, everything today is marketing, everything today is persona, everything today is branding, and a lot of that either comes from pro wrestling or it's adjacent to pro wrestling.
social media is definitely one giant gimmick. That's all I got to say about that.
100%. It's all a gimmick. It's all, that's not, social media is as real as Monday Night Raw,
I think sometimes actually Monday Night Raw is a little bit more real than social media, because I mean, with AI now, you never even know what's real. That's a crazy thing.
Yeah, that's a whole. I don't even want to get into
Yeah.
that. That's a whole.
That's
a whole
that's scary.
podcast, my man.
I agree, and that's scary stuff. But Mark, I got to say, man, again, thank you so much for this body of work. I'm super stoked to get my hands on it on the 20th of June. But for now, man, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully down the line, when you do write the next book, we can make this happen again. But for now, good luck on the rest of your book tour. I know you got a lot of dates coming up as well, so good luck on that. And I know you don't need luck with the book release, because I already know it is going to absolutely tear the book charts up. But either way, thank you so much, and we definitely shall talk again here soon. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you.